The NHL is not capping. There will be a playoff salary cap come the 2026 postseason.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, September 3rd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. Shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So grateful to be back here once again on another edition of the show, and some news that came out yesterday discussing that there will be a playoff salary cap come the 2026 postseason for the entirety of the NHL. This was first reported by Frank Seravalli, and the tweet by Frank reads this: sources, the NHL and the NHLPA have agreed to a rolling implementation schedule for CBA changes. Among them, a new playoff salary cap system will come into effect this season for the 2026 Stanley Cup playoffs. So we are going to discuss some of the details of the changes this coming season. We're going to also discuss where the Panthers would have been last season with the cap due to the fact that they added some pieces at the trade deadline after, and then also what would it look like for a cap compliant roster this season if things go right for the Panthers, if they have an opportunity to keep everybody. That's all going to be dependent on health. But yeah, this is something that some have been wanting to see change over the last few years, because really, I mean, there's been the loophole of LTIR, and this was first a discussion point in the early 2000s, right before the salary cap came into place after the 04-05 lockout, where Ken Holland brought the question saying, okay, what happens if you don't have enough players in the playoffs in the case of there being a salary cap? So you would have to be forced to play a man short. So that was a question that Ken Holland first brought up when he was the GM of the Detroit Red Wings when this came about. So GMs have been able to adapt from years on end when it came to how to expose it and play within the rules. This was something that teams have not been penalized for using, being over the cap during the postseason. So we saw it with the Chicago Blackhawks in 2015 when Patrick Kane was going through his deals there. We saw it with the Tampa Bay Lightning being $17 million over the cap when Nikita Kucherov did not play the entirety of the regular season, but was activated in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And then right before the trade deadline, Steven Stamkos goes down with an injury. So that gave them an opportunity to create more trades and be up to $17 million over the cap when the playoffs did hit in 2021, which the Panthers did lose to them in 6 games that year, which the Panthers gave them the best challenge throughout that entirety of their Stanley Cup final run. And this was something that the Vegas Golden Knights have been notorious for using, which they're going to be using again this year. That's how they were able to acquire Mitch Marner from the Toronto Maple Leafs in a sign-in trade. They got Nick Waugh's contract off the books. Alex Pietrangelo is likely not going to be playing hockey ever again due to the injuries. I mean, he did miss the Four Nations due to the ailment that he was going through. And also, the Panthers were beneficiaries of this for many years. We spoke about 2023 with Patrick Hornquist going down with a head injury that gave the Panthers an opportunity to reactivate Anthony Duclair right when he was ready after the Achilles injury. And it worked to the Panthers' favor when Aaron Ekblad went through his second lower body injury as well, and when it came to Matthew Tkachuk's injury at the Four Nations. So there have been a lot of the criticisms of how GMs have been timing these injuries and how long and whether they believe that players are going to be able to come back in time for the playoffs. And listen, there's been a lot of the speculation out there. Oh, if they were healthy in game 81 or 82, then they should be able to play and suit up. But the teams would not have been cap compliant, but that just goes away right when game 1 of the playoffs goes. So that is something that a lot of fans and front offices have also been wanting to see a little bit of those changes for that. So what the details when it comes to this new playoff salary cap of what is going to be implemented is not going to be the entirety of your roster. It's going to be the players dressed going into the said game, but there's a little bit more that is going to be added when it comes to how you're going to put your team together when it comes to putting it for a game. So dead cap space as far as buyouts, recapture penalties, and retained salaries are going to be salaries that will count to a team's cap for the playoffs. But games played bonuses, and keep this in mind, games played bonuses, not different type of bonuses like advancing to a certain round. Those are excluded from the cap. So in the case of the Florida Panthers and Jeff Petrie, which he has a games played bonus of 20, 30, 40, 60, and then he has different type of bonuses of how far the Panthers go. So in the next year, in 2026-27, that the games played bonus for Jeff Petrie will be excluded in next year's Stanley Cup playoffs if the Panthers make it. But the winning the Stanley Cup, which is a $50K bonus for Jeff Petrie, and advancing deeper into the playoffs, which is another bonus in the beginning of the playoffs if the Panthers advance, those are the ones that will be counted. But the key that could still expose a little bit of a loophole for teams across the NHL is how strategically teams will be putting as far as who gets scratched, who gets played. So there's still a little bit of something to be exposed that teams could place when it comes to putting something together here. But in actuality, when it comes to the news cycle, when it comes to the NHL and also creating popularity around the 4 major sports, which, I mean, it's tough when you're competing with the new TV deals. Like we mentioned this, we had an episode on TV deals just 2 weeks ago, but seeing the TV deals that the NBA now is in, ESPN has now acquired Red Zone and parts of NFL entertainment. So the NHL has a little bit of catching up to do. But once again, this is a great opportunity for the NHL as far as the TV part of things to at least be in more households. And maybe that's a little bit of a rise in the salary cap. And with the Panthers locking in a lot of guys, that creates more of that space once again, like we spoke about, of filling the edges around the roster. But this makes player movement once again less likely around the trade deadline, and a lot of teams around the NHL in free agency, when it came to the rise in the cap as well from one year to the next. And in the example of this year, the Florida Panthers free agents were guys that a lot of teams kept eyes on, but with the rise, the Panthers were able to keep their guys together. But had this rule been in place, chances are the Panthers don't make the trades that they did when it came to the trade deadline. So it makes it less exciting for that. And don't you want to create a little bit of momentum when it comes to your sport? That's the part kind of where I disagree when it comes to the playoff cap. Not necessarily about the teams going over the cap for the playoffs, but the fact is that you want players to you want the news cycle to be just taking over when it comes to this time of year. Yeah, the NHL trade deadline does not fall into the same week as the NBA, and also the trade deadline is when there's more than almost 75% of your season done. So that's also a strange timing when it comes to when it is for teams. But this is a situation where general managers have to adapt here. And this is a situation where I look at it and I'm not necessarily angry about it, but I think of it as, okay, Bill Zito has had to adapt. We as a society have had to adapt on multiple occasions throughout these last 5 years. I mean, you think about the advancements of AI, and also how people like myself have gone from corporate offices to working remotely, like I'm bringing you this podcast right now. It's all about adaptation, and how do general managers adapt to this new reality that it's coming a year earlier than we expected. Had the Panthers known about this, maybe Bill Zito did know, who knows? But if this was known immediately prior to it being announced publicly, would he have done the moves to retain some of the free agents that were going to be this offseason that just passed? So that's a question that we'll never know. And I don't think that if you put a microphone in front of Bill Zito that he'll actually give you a straight answer. But the injury factor is part of it when it comes to still keeping likes of an Evan Rodriguez or Jesper Boquist, which we're going to mention them a little bit more later on in the programming. But coming up, we are going to discuss the Panthers and how they would have fared last postseason had this rule been in effect. We're going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. And ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Most people can't name their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. Or when you don't have a full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've been putting off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at Monarch Money in your browser for half off of your first year. That's 50% off of your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Segment number 2 here on this Wednesday, September 3rd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Wednesday. We are going to continue the discussion of playoff salary cap for the Florida Panthers. And yes, once again, this is a loophole that that general manager Bill Zito was able to expose, but also you could see it as a great opportunity as the Panthers took advantage of it and it definitely is a big reason why the Panthers were able to call themselves back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. So like we mentioned, when it came to the playoff cap, the bonuses, the recapture penalties, buyouts were still going to be on a team's cap when it comes to how you put your game day roster. So you exclude the scratches, but you still add those different factors. So let's recap of what the dead money that the Panthers did have on their books from the playoffs last year. So the Panthers were still in the very, very last year of Keith Yandel's buyout, which like the Panthers bought that out prior to the 2022 season. They got the cap relief, and then the ramifications hit a little harder later, which was in Matthew Tkachuk's first year with the Florida Panthers. But there's still those because Keith Yandel had those additional those 2 years left on his deal. It doubles the length of the contract still, but at a lower hit. So there was $1.2 million left on Keith Yandel's deal from that buyout, which stretched it out more. There was the $500K bonus that was paid out from the Panthers to Kyle Okposo for winning the 2024 Stanley Cup. Although he signed that deal with the Buffalo Sabres, that was one that was added on his deal, which was a 1-year deal at the time. The Kyle Okposo signed an 8-year deal with the Buffalo after 2016 with the New York Islanders, and then signed a 1-year deal to try to give it one more run, and then said, hey, I want to win a Stanley Cup. Traded to the Panthers. That was still part of the deal, which the Panthers had to end up paying for. But obviously that's nothing when it comes to the salary cap of $88 million. Let's not forget it was an $88 million salary cap last year for the entirety of the league. And the Panthers also had 17.4 thousand of recapture cap for Spencer Knight's contract after trading him. So thankfully, Puckpedia and the person who runs the site, Hart Levine, also posted the game day cap for Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final, and where each of the two teams, Edmonton and Florida, stood when they took the ice there. And obviously, there's, like we spoke about, there wasn't any rules of the cap for what they had to, where they had to be as far as being a cap compliant roster. So when it comes to that, so do you want to guess how many games the Panthers would have been cap compliant in the entirety of the 2025 Stanley Cup playoffs? I'm going to give you a few seconds to guess before looking it up. The answer is 6. 6 out of the 23 games. The 23 total games that the Panthers played in, and only 6 of them were where the Panthers were cap compliant in the salary cap world of $88 million. So some of which stand out right away. You can, if you are not only an everyday to the podcast, but you're a diehard Panther fan. Obviously, if you're listening to the show, you're a diehard fan who wants to get your daily Florida Panthers fix. You have a recollection of a lot of moments in the playoffs as well. So the ones that stand out: Games 1 and 2 against Tampa Bay, where Aaron Ekblad was still serving his 20-game suspension for PEDs, which crazy to think that still that when you are suspended, your cap hit does come off the books for a team. I think if you really want to stick it to teams of hey, this shouldn't be something that you do, it should count towards a team's cap. But hey, from a Florida Panthers perspective, we're happy that it brings a little bit of relief. It did bring a little bit of relief at the time, but that came after the trade deadline. So not like the Panthers were able to use it, because if they made trades after the fact, that player that they would have traded for would have been ineligible for the postseason. So that didn't end up mattering for the Panthers. So games 1 and 2 against Tampa Bay, and then game 6 against Tampa Bay, and game 1 of round 2 against the Toronto Maple Leafs, which again, that was after the suspension for Aaron Ekblad, after he put the forearm to the head of Brandon Hagel. So sorry, game 5 of the first round against Tampa Bay. They didn't make it to a game 6. So game 5 against the Tampa Bay Lightning for the Panthers, and game 1 against the Toronto Maple Leafs. So Aaron Ekblad served an additional 2-game suspension after that. So they were cap compliant there, as his $7.5 million would have been off the books for the Panthers. So there was other injuries that happened during the playoffs, but in one case for the Panthers, on a big piece as far as a role player for the Panthers in Evan Rodriguez. Let's not forget, he took that interference call from Oliver Ekman-Larsson in the middle of the series when the series shifted to South Florida. So Evan Rodriguez ended up missing games 5 and 6. And I remember Paul Maurice after game 7 talking about how there is no doubt that if Evan Rodriguez was healthy, that I was putting him back there for a game 7 situation, which that, although it wasn't the top line that stole the show, you want your best players out there. It was the Brad Marchand and Seth Jones show for the Panthers. But even with Evan Rodriguez out of the mix for the Panthers there, it would not have made the Panthers cap compliant for games 5 and 6 against the Toronto Maple Leafs, which one of the games the Panthers were able to just take the bull by the horn and dominate the Toronto Maple Leafs on the road, and then the other one, the Panthers were a complete no-show. But to think that it's still hilarious how, hey, you lose a home game 7, get shut out, Austin Matthews and Max Pacioretty get on the board, and then you still find a way to dominate a game 7, which once again, 23 shot attempts, 23 of the first shot attempts before Toronto could get anything going. But games 3 and 4 of the Eastern Conference Final, where Sam Reinhart took that knee-on-knee collision from Andrei Svechnikov in Game 2, only played 5 minutes, and still the Panthers were able to run away with Game 2, run away with Game 3. The Game 4 was the Jacob Slavin game for the Carolina Hurricanes, where he played 30 minutes. He was playing every other shift for the Carolina Hurricanes, and that was the conversation of, oh, they finally snapped their 15-game losing streak, and a little bit of pressure was back on for the Florida Panthers as the series shifted to Carolina. But still, what Sam Reinhart went through and the fact that he was still able to play after that, which you look at the replay and you're just thinking, ooh, the knee is not supposed to bend in that direction, but still props to him. So those are the 6 games. So that the Panthers were not cap compliant. The rest were cap compliant, excuse me. The rest of the way, over the cap, but they just like we mentioned earlier, they played by the rules. But if they had to have played by the rules and put a cap compliant roster of 88 million, there's still a few loopholes that the Panthers could have placed there in the 2025 playoffs. First of all, you're not making the trade for Vitek Vanacek to begin with. Yeah, you could still make the trade for Seth Jones and still put a solid decor around your goaltender. But you think of the 93 million, you subtract Vitek Vanacek's 3.4, you're still a million and change over. So you're gonna have to make some hard decisions on to scratch someone around like the $2 or $3 million $1 million range there. So again, you're thinking about, once again, Evan Rodriguez in this situation. Jesper Boquist extension kicks in this season, so that would have been a wash for who to take out. So you're thinking Evan Rodriguez there. You're possibly thinking of a Niko Mikkola, but again, your team is weaker in that aspect. Yeah, Dmitry Kulikov can go up a spot. You insert Uvis Belinskis. Remember, you have to insert Uvis Belinskis' cap hit, which is $850K. And also, what do the Panthers do as far as backup goaltender? Do they keep Chris Drieger because their trade for Kaapo Kähkönen, who was in the AHL, he was making just south of 3. So that is not the numbers wise, that would have not have made sense. So yeah, the Panthers were able to retain half of the salary of Brad Marchand, which was just north of 3. So do you consider scratching him as well? But also, let's not forget, when the trade was first proposed, we didn't even know if he was going to play to begin with. So thankfully, he was able to make his debut against the Utah Hockey Club at the time, now you called Utah Mammoth. He set up Sam Bennett on that game winner on the Friday in March. And it's been a great marriage for Brad Marchand and the Panthers since. But you would have to make some tough, uncomfortable decisions, and decisions that would have made your team a little bit weaker there in the case of putting a game day roster. But thankfully, with Aaron Ekblad taking a discount, same with Brad Marchand, as that deal has stretched in a 6-year run, and even with a raise of Sam Bennett going from just north of 4.4 to 8 million, the percentage of the cap between those three with the rise is less than what they were last season. So that's just amazing work once again by Bill Zito and what he's been able to do there. So without the loophole, you got to ask yourself, do the Panthers even repeat as Stanley Cup champions? I still think they have a big chance, but maybe the series is a little closer. The decisions of running it back by as far as other role players, excluding Brad Marchand, because I don't think they'd make that trade to begin with, of retaining Aaron Ekblad and even a Tomáš Nosek. Maybe you keep Tomáš Nosek and he gets a significant raise. Mackie Samoskevich also gets a little bit of a raise too, and you get to keep everyone, at least more of the guys, into the mix as well. Mackie probably gets a bigger role there for the Cats. Who knows? But coming up next in segment number 3, we are going to try to make a cap compliant roster for the postseason. If a few things go right for the Panthers, as far as keeping the guys together. We'll discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready to kick off with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. And I love using FanDuel because it gives me an opportunity to maybe win big. Although the Miami Dolphins are a big underdog to win the AFC East, you could come out with big winnings if you place a bet on them, as they will be taking on Daniel Jones and the Indianapolis Colts on Sunday at 1 p.m. You think that South Florida native Lamar Jackson will win his third MVP? You could place those bets all on FanDuel. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Third and final segment here on this Wednesday, September 3rd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Wednesday. So we are going to continue the discussion of playoff cap and how the Panthers, if things go right, how they can find a way to keep everybody and still put a cap compliant roster for the 2026 playoffs. So like I said, it has to be the players, the 20 players that you dress. So the scratches are those will provide a little bit of a cap relief. And if you are on YouTube here, you will see that I have an Excel spreadsheet out here for the Panthers and every single cap hit on the Panthers roster. A total of 24 players, obviously 23 with Matthew Tkachuk being sidelined until at least early January. At least that's the expectation. But the Panthers can still keep everybody, including likes like a Boquist and an Evan Rodriguez, if someone of the $5 million range and ends up going down. And also, I want to mention something from Frank Seravalli of what he mentioned on Bleacher Report yesterday. He says of Evan Rodriguez, quote, he'd probably be the most likely candidate to move. The answer teams got when they called the Panthers about someone like Rodriguez was that they weren't interested in moving him, close quote. That's something that he did say yesterday on the Bleacher Report Live. So, like I said, in order for the Panthers to keep everybody, someone of $5 million and up would have to be sidelined for the rest of the regular season. I'm not expecting the Panthers to be active at the trade deadline. And even if everyone is healthy by the time Matthew Tkachuk does come back to the lineup, you're going to be at exactly zero when it comes to the salary cap, and you don't really accrue salary cap space when you're at zero. Just like think about it like accruing interest in one way or the other, whether you owe money or whether you are trying to gain money in the stock market. So if you're looking at the spreadsheet, pay attention to three numbers here: total game day cap hit, playoff roster cap relief, and total cap, which is right now, this is going to reflect Puckpedia at 100 million. So this number where my cursor is at should not change whatsoever. If it does change, I have done something wrong. So, and we'll be doing some dragging players into certain spots, and the number here of total game day cap hit is going to change as it goes. So right now, the Panthers at full strength, at their best roster that you could put there, as far as the repeating from last year, is Verhaeghe, Barkov, Reinhart, Rodriguez, Bennett, Tkachuk, Luosterainen, Lundell, Marchand, Gadjevich, Nosek, Greer as far as your forwards. Defense, Forsling, Ekblad, Mikala Jones, Kulikov, Petrie, and then Bobrovsky, Tarasov. That would be a total cap hit of $96.1 million for the Florida Panthers. But next year's cap will be, the ceiling is at $95.5 million for the Panthers here. So there's a few things that the Panthers would have to work with. Like I said, if an injury in the regular season helps them keep it together. But if that doesn't happen, yes, the guys of Erod and Jesper are goners. But in the case that they do keep the guys together, there is still a way to keep the guys together here on the roster. So the easy one would be moving Evan Rodriguez to as far as a scratch, and then putting Mackie Samoskevich back into the lineup. That would make the total game day cap hit right as of right now of $93.875 million. But you want to put, you still want to add Evan Rodriguez back in. You still want him as an important part of your lineup. He plays power play too. Doesn't really play the penalty kill, but really has that flexibility up and down the lineup for the Panthers here. So, removing Kulikov out of the mix doesn't really make the most sense. It's a reasonable contract for the Panthers. So there's also maybe some uncomfortable conversations that you'd have to make if you choose to go in a different direction. So if you move Niko Mikkola out of the mix and you put Uvis Belinskis back in, which we've seen the Kulikov Belinskis mix, but if you switch Jeff Petrie to the second pair, that's not a really strong second pair. So that's the little bit of a flaw when it comes to the lineup here. So that putting Mikkola out of the lineup and putting Uvis Belinskis, which I wouldn't recommend, that would have your total game day cap at $94.45 million for the Florida Panthers here. So the writing, unfortunately, on the wall would be that if the playoffs started today, that Jesper Boquist would be a healthy scratch mostly every single game of the playoffs here. And let's do another one, which we spoke about minimum salaries, which Sam Miskevich is a minimum salary at $775K, making a lower cap hit than what he made in the previous year. And the great thing is that the Panthers can't move Mackie Samoskevich, that he's not waivers exempt, so he has to be a big part of this mix for the Panthers. You have to try to make a way for him to work. I wouldn't recommend trading him. That the Panthers wouldn't be cap compliant to begin with, even if they were to trade him in the regular season. So Mackie Samoskevich, you put him in place of AJ Greer, whose cap hit is $850K. Even if you were to put Mackie's onto the fourth line, which Mackie's strength is you need Mackie Samoskevich to play in the top six. I do not want to see Mackie Samoskevich play in a fourth line role. If he's fourth line and playing on power play one, I don't think you're putting him to be at his max potential there. So this is a little bit of a tough spot for the coaching staff to be in here. And even then, putting Mackie Samoskevich here and in place of AJ Greer, you're still over the cap by just over $500,000 in this situation. So this is where kind of once again, the roster gymnastics will have to be on point for the Panthers, because are you really going to take one of your best penalty killers in Eetu Luostarinen out of the lineup in place for, although Jesper Boquist could play PK minutes, do you really think he has the same floor as an Eetu Luostarinen? Yeah, put it. I don't believe so. But as far as cap wise and how the numbers work, you could that would put the Panthers total cap at 94.6 if you were to put Boquist on that third line in place of Eetu. But in no situation, under no circumstance, would I, if Eetu Luostarinen is healthy enough to play, you put him out there. That third line is the reason why the Panthers were as successful as they have been over these last two playoff runs in winning their back-to-back Stanley Cups. And by the way, happy birthday to Tomas Nosek, Alexander Barkov, and Eetu Luostarinen, who all three of them have had birthdays over the last few days. Nosek on September 1st and Eetu and Barkov on September 2nd. So you look at the rest of the lineup and you don't see scratches of anyone on the top line. Barkov, Reinhart, Verhaeghe, Bennett, if he's healthy, he's in. But there also could be there. We spoke about Sam Bennett, and yeah, the contract is going to be really great in the first few years, but also the fact is that he gets hurt a lot due to his style of play. So that's another factor of who could come in place of Sam Bennett into the lineup. I'm gonna put Luke Cunnin in that place, but don't get married to Luke Cunnin being on the second line. I'm just putting it as far as in place. And look at that, $88.8 million. If in the case that Sam Bennett does get hurt. But again, if Sam Bennett is healthy, he's in. So again, this will come down if the Panthers are able to manage through the regular season and keep everybody. When the playoffs do come around, if that situation does happen, it's gonna be a little uncomfortable for certain players, and Paul Maurice is definitely going to be scratching his head on what to do and how to make the math work. So again, adapt or die when it comes to putting a lineup together in this new salary cap world, which we're thankful that the rise has helped the Panthers keep the band together. But in the case of Jesper Boquist, who I mentioned, of him being a scratch almost every single night, this is why you gave him a 2-year deal, which if you're able to keep him around and have him learn a little bit, which he was also a scratch for the majority of the playoffs in 2025, maybe that it's an opportunity for him to get into the lineup again. If what I said earlier of someone $5 million or up does end up going down and misses the entirety of the regular season, that's the only way that this math would be able to work in order to keep everybody. But I hope you guys enjoyed this exercise here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. I appreciate you guys for listening once again here on the show. And we are just a few weeks away from training camp, media day, and rookie showcase. So once again, September, hockey is back as we are 34 days away from opening night. Thank you once again for listening. And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Livingstone and Steve Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team